Abdul Ghani Baradar and Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani have discussed various issues, including Qatar's economic and investment topics in Afghanistan. This visit is expected to last 3 days. Hamdullah Fetrad, the deputy spokesperson for the Islamic Emirate, stated regarding the economic deputy's trip to Qatar, respected Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the economic deputy of the Prime Minister's Office of the Islamic Emirate, met with Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani during his visit to Qatar. In this meeting, they discussed the relations between the two countries, economic issues, and investment. Lebanese news sources reported, referencing the unrest in Beirut, that the situation on the road to Beirut airport has returned to normal and the area is calm. Al-Manaz reporter stated that protesters on the airport road confirmed their goal is to ensure the return of stranded citizens at Iran's airport to their homes and to prevent Lebanese state institutions from yielding to external pressures and dictates. According to this report, the situation on the airport road has normalized, and protesters expressed their opposition to the attack on UNIFIL convoy. While some protesters intended to voice their objections to the cancellation of flights from Tehran to Beirut for the transfer of passengers, certain elements are attempting to turn this peaceful movement into violent actions and chaos in the country. Al-Mana reported that individuals with covered faces are organizing suspicious actions and creating unrest on Rafiq Hariri Airport Road. This network, affiliated with Hezbollah, urged Lebanese protesters not to join these individuals. Meanwhile, hostile media outlets have attempted to attribute these movements and the attack on UNIFIL forces to Hezbollah supporters. Following this suspicious action, Nabih Berri, the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, in a message called on the protesters to exercise patience and urged them to leave the streets in order to counter the instigators. Additionally, the Amal movement in Lebanon condemned the attacks on UNIFIL forces in southern Lebanon through a statement and called for the perpetrators of tonight's unrest to be dealt with by the Lebanese army and security forces. The Amal movement also regarded the attack on UNIFIL forces as an attack on southern Lebanon and emphasized that blocking roads anywhere in the country is a stab at internal peace and reconciliation. The Lebanese army referred to the unrest in Beirut as a provocative act and warned of its consequences. In a statement, the Lebanese army noted that several areas, particularly near Rafiq Hariri International Airport, witnessed protests, including attacks on army forces, assaults on vehicles belonging to the UN forces in Lebanon, UNIFIL, and attempts to block the airport road. The Lebanese army's statement highlighted the sensitivity of the country's situation regarding such actions aimed at creating internal tensions, which carry severe consequences. The Lebanese army emphasized that its units will continue to fulfill their responsibility in maintaining security and will firmly respond to any threats to internal peace, apprehending those responsible for insecurity. New York, AP. Workers across the country responded with anger and confusion Friday as they grappled with the Trump administration's aggressive effort to shrink the size of the federal workforce by ordering agencies to lay off probationary employees who have yet to qualify for civil service protections. While much of the administration's attention was focused on disrupting bureaucracy in Washington, the broad-based effort to slash the government workforce was impacting a far wider swath of workers. As layoff notices were sent out agency by agency, federal employees from Michigan to Florida were left reeling from being told that their services were no longer needed. In a sign of how chaotic the firings have been, some who received layoff notices had already accepted the administration's deferred resignation offer, under which they were supposed to be paid until September 30 if they agreed to quit, raising questions about whether others who signed the deal would nonetheless be fired. On Friday evening, the Office of Personnel Management, which serves as a human resources department for the federal government, acknowledged that some employees may have received termination notices in error and said the buyouts agreements would be honored. Advertisement. This has been slash and burn, said Nicholas Detter, who had been working in Kansas as a natural resource specialist, helping farmers reduce soil and water erosion, until he was fired by email late Thursday night. He said there seemed to be little thought about how employees and the farmers and ranchers he helped would be impacted. Related stories. Trump administration lays off probationary government workers, warns others of large cuts to come. Trump administration lays off probationary government workers, warns others of large cuts to come. What to know about Trump's buyout proposal for federal employees? What to know about Trump's buyout proposal for federal employees? Federal workers debate legitimacy of buyout offer as deadline nears. Federal workers debate legitimacy of buyout offer as deadline nears. None of this has been done thoughtfully or carefully, he said. The White House and OPM declined to say Friday how many probationary workers, who generally have less than a year on the job, have so far been dismissed. According to government data maintained by OPM, 220,000 workers had less than a year on the job as of March 2024. Advertisement. OMP has given agencies until 8 p.m. Tuesday to issue layoff notices, according to a person familiar with the plan who requested anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly. The probationary layoffs are the latest salvo in the new administration's sweeping efforts to reduce the size of the federal workforce, which are being led by billionaire Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency. Trump, in an executive order Tuesday, told agency leaders to plan for large-scale reductions after their initial attempt to downsize the workforce. The voluntary buyout was accepted by only 75,000 workers. Advertisement. On Thursday night, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced the dismissal of more than 1,000 employees who had served for less than 2 years. That included researchers working on cancer treatment, opioid addiction, prosthetics and burn pit exposure, U.S. Sen. Patty Murray, a Democrat, said Thursday. Dozens were fired from the Education Department, including special education specialists and student aid officials, according to a union that represents agency workers. At the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, nearly 1,300 probationary employees, roughly one-tenth of the agency's total workforce, are being forced out. The Atlanta-based agency's leadership was notified of the decision Friday morning, according to a federal official who was at the meeting and was not authorized to discuss the orders and requested anonymity. The new Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins said Friday that her agency had invited Musk's DOGE team with open arms and that layoffs will be forthcoming. Clearly, it's a new day, Rollins said at the White House. I think the American people spoke on November 5, that they believed that government was too big. Advertisement. Workers impacted. Andrew Lennox, a 10-year Marine veteran, was part of a new supervisor training program at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He said he received an email out of the blue Thursday evening informing him that he was being terminated. In order to help veterans, you just fired a veteran, said Lennox, 35, a former USMC infantryman who was deployed to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Lennox had been working as an administrative officer at the VA since mid-December and said he would love nothing more than to keep working. This is my family, and I would like to do this forever, he said. In a post on its website, the VA announced the dismissal of more than 1,000 employees, saying the personnel moves will save the department more than $98 million per year and be better equipped to help vets. I was like, what about this one? Lennox said. David Rice, a disabled Army paratrooper who has been on probation since joining the U.S. Department of Energy in September, also learned Thursday night that he had lost his job. Rice, who has been working as a foreign affairs specialist on health matters relating to radiation exposure, said he'd been led to believe that his job would likely be safe. But on Thursday night, when he logged into his computer for a meeting with Japanese representatives, he saw an email saying he'd been fired. Advertisement. It's just been chaos, said Rice, 50, who had just bought a house in Melbourne, Florida, after he got the job. Rice said he agrees with the Trump administration's goal of making the government more efficient, but objects to the random, scattershot approach being taken. Fired despite agreeing to the buyout. Some of those impacted had already signed the buyout agreements offered by the administration that were supposed to protect them from dismissal. Debtor, 25, who had worked for the Agriculture Department's Natural Resources Conservation Service, said he had accepted the buyout because he knew that, as a probationary employee, he'd likely be first on the chopping block if he didn't accept. But late Thursday night, Debtor received an email saying he had been laid off effective immediately, even though he had received completely positive evaluations during his time on the job. He said the decision left him feeling disrespected and a little bit helpless. "You're just kind of a pawn in a much bigger struggle that Elon Musk in particular, I feel like is his kind of battle he's decided to take on to shrink the government," Debtor said. Debtor said 2 of the 4 employees in the Kansas county where he worked were laid off even though they were already struggling with their workload helping farmers manage their land to prevent soil erosion and water pollution, a program that was created in the wake of the 1930s Dust Bowl to help keep America's farmland healthy and productive. Challenging the administration. The National Treasury Employees Union and a group of other unions filed a lawsuit Thursday challenging what they call unlawful terminations. Terminating probationary employees who have gone through extensive training will have a devastating impact on agency missions and government operations, anti-EU President Doreen Greenwald wrote in a Thursday letter to union members. She said many federal agencies are already severely understaffed due to years of frozen or slashed budgets that prevented them from replacing retiring employees. On Friday evening, the advocacy group Democracy Forward filed a complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, the federal agency dedicated to protecting whistleblowers, asking for an investigation into whether the mass firings violated federal personnel practices and asking that they be halted while the inquiry is being conducted. Labor activists and government workers rallied outside the Hubert H. Humphrey building in Washington Friday morning, to protest the cuts. "They're picking us off, one by one," said one federal contractor who has not yet lost her job, but who, like others, declined to identify herself for fear of reprisal. "First, it's the probationary workers, then we're next," she said. "Will the cuts reduce the deficit? The layoffs are unlikely to yield significant deficit savings. The government spends about $270 billion annually compensating civilian federal workers, according to the Congressional Budget Office, with about 60% going to workers at the Departments of Defense, Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs. Even if the government cut all of those workers, it would still run a deficit of over $1 trillion. But Trump's mass layoffs of federal workers could come back to bite him in economic data. The monthly jobs reports could start to show a slowdown in hiring, if not turn negative at some point after the February numbers are released. The last time the economy lost jobs was in December 2020, when the United States was still recovering from the coronavirus pandemic. Given everything that is happening in the federal government, it is very plausible that job growth could turn negative at some point, said Martha Jimble, executive director of the Budget Lab at Yale University. She noted that employers that rely on government grants and contracts would also show declines. Those who have been fired say the people they serve will soon feel the impact, too. Rice, the disabled paratrooper working on radiation exposure at the Department of Energy, said the work he was doing made a difference. "We're just out here trying to do something that we actually believe in, that matters," he said. "I really believe that we're actually out there helping people."